"Can I sleep here tonight?" I asked, my voice barely a cracked whisper over the shrieking wind, my frozen fingers gripping the heavy oak doorframe. The man standing in the hearth's glow didn't move. He was a mountain of shadow and muscle, his eyes glowing a faint, terrifying amber in the dim light. I didn't know his name. I didn't care. The blizzard behind me was certain death. The stranger before me was only a possibility of it. "You have no idea whose door you've knocked on, little wolf," he murmured. The cold had become a living, breathing entity, a predator far more relentless than the ones tracking me. Every breath I dragged into my lungs felt like swallowing crushed glass. The Blackmere woods were notoriously unforgiving, a sprawling expanse of ancient pines and treacherous ravines that swallowed travelers whole. For 3 days, I had been running from the ashes of my old life, running from the suffocating grip of Gideon Ashvale when the cabin had appeared through the blinding whiteout of the blizzard. It felt like a cruel mirage, a massive structure of dark, hand-hewn timber, its windows glowing with a faint, mocking warmth against the desolate winter landscape. I had practically crawled up the stone steps, my limbs numb, my blood sluggish and freezing in my veins. I hadn't expected salvation. I had only hoped for a place to die where the wind couldn't reach me. But the man who answered the door was no hallucination. He stood there now, studying me with a gaze that felt like a physical weight. Eamon, though I didn't know his name yet, his presence was an undeniable force, filling the vast, vaulted room of the cabin. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders draped in a thick, dark woolen sweater that clung to the hard lines of his chest. His hair was raven black, slightly unruly, falling over a face carved from granite and harsh experience. But it was his eyes that arrested me. They were a striking, unnatural amber, currently narrowed in a mixture of suspicion and predatory calculation. "Close the door," he commanded. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated in the floorboards beneath my trembling boots. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute edict. I shoved the heavy door shut, sealing out the howling fury of the blizzard. The sudden silence of the cabin was deafening, broken only by the violent chattering of my teeth and the aggressive crackle of the massive logs burning in the stone fireplace. I stood rooted to the spot, a pathetic, shivering mess of ice-caked clothes and bruised skin, melting snow forming a dark puddle on his immaculate wooden floor. I can leave in the morning," I stammered, my words slurring slightly from the cold. The storm. It's too thick. I lost the trail." He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The grace of his movement was jarring for a man of his size. It was the silent, lethal glide of a predator closing in on wounded prey. My instincts, honed by years of surviving under Gideon's thumb, screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. "There is no trail in this part of the Blackmere," he stated, his amber eyes trailing over my battered form. He was cataloging every detail. The tear in my coat, the purple bruise blooming along my jawline, the scent of fear and exhaustion rolling off me. "No one comes up this far, not unless they are lost, or they are running." "I'm not running." I lied. It was a pathetic, transparent lie, and we both knew it. A dark, humorless smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Lie to me again, little wolf, and I will put you back out in the snow." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that it chilled me deeper than the blizzard. I swallowed hard, forcing my chin up. "My name is Lourdes Carranza. I survived the slaughter of the Silver Pine Pack. I survived Gideon Ashvale. I would not cower before a hermit in the woods, no matter how intimidating he was. I'm running," I admitted, my voice steadying, though my body continued to violently tremble. "But I didn't bring trouble to your door intentionally. I just need one night, just until the whiteout clears." He stopped barely 2 feet away from me. The heat radiating off his body was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the icy agony of my own skin. Up close, I could see the fine network of scars peeking out from the collar of his sweater, a testament to a violent past. He leaned in slightly, his nose twitching. He was scenting me. Panic flared in my chest. If he realized what I was, a half-blood, an anomaly, a prize, Gideon was tearing the forests apart to find he might kill me himself. But my scent was masked by days of pine needles, freezing mud, and my own dried blood. "Take off the coat," he ordered, turning his back on me and walking toward a heavy leather armchair by the fire. "Excuse me?" I bristled, wrapping my arms around myself defensively. He didn't turn around. He simply picked up a heavy wool blanket from the back of the chair and tossed it over his shoulder, where it landed flawlessly in my arms. Your coat is freezing to your skin. If you don't take it off, you'll lose toes to frostbite, and I loathe the smell of rotting flesh in my home. Take it off. Sit by the fire. Do not touch anything else. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before my survival instinct overrode my pride. My fingers were so stiff I could barely work the zipper. When the icy, wet fabric finally fell to the floor, I wrapped the thick, dry blanket tightly around my shoulders and hobbled toward the hearth. The heat hit me like a physical blow, drawing a sharp, agonizing gasp from my lungs as my nerve endings began to violently thaw. I sank onto the rug before the fire, pulling my knees to my chest. I watched him from the corner of my eye. He was pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter across the room. He seemed entirely unbothered by my presence. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that he was tracking my every breath, my every heartbeat. Who was this man? Why did he live alone in a fortress at the top of the world? As the exhaustion finally began to drag me under, pulling me into a dark, dreamless void, I realized I had crossed a threshold from which I might never return. I had sought refuge from a monster, only to lock myself in a cage with something entirely unknown, and as my eyes fluttered shut, I could have sworn I heard him whisper, "Sleep while you can, lords." He knew my name. I awoke to the smell of burning cedar and roasted meat. For a disorienting moment, I thought I was back in the Silver Pine kitchens, before the fire, before the screams, but the harsh, heavy silence of the cabin pressed down on me, shattering the illusion. I opened my eyes, wincing at the bright, blinding sunlight streaming through the massive frost-covered windows. The blizzard had broken, leaving behind a world buried under a glittering, suffocating blanket of white. I pushed myself up, groaning as every muscle in my body protested. I was still on the rug before the fireplace, wrapped in the wool blanket. My wet clothes were gone. Panic seized my throat until I looked down and realized I was wearing an impossibly large, soft flannel shirt that hung past my knees. Someone had changed me. He had changed me. A flush of heat, entirely unrelated to the roaring fire, crawled up my neck. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the collar of the flannel, my eyes darting around the expansive room. It was magnificent in the daylight. Towering bookshelves, heavy iron chandeliers, and pelts of massive, unrecognizable beasts draped over the furniture. But the man was nowhere to be seen. "You're awake." I spun around. He was standing in the doorway of what looked like a kitchen, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed over his broad chest. In the daylight, Eamon was even more striking. His amber eyes were piercing, his jaw covered in a dark shadow of stubble. He exuded an aura of absolute authority. It wasn't just physical dominance. It was something ancient and heavy in his blood. "You changed my clothes," I blurted out, defensive and painfully aware of my vulnerability. He didn't flinch. "You were hypothermic. Your core temperature was dropping. Had I left you in those frozen rags, you would have been dead by 3 a.m. Your modesty is of little concern to me when weighed against a corpse in my living room." His logic was cold, impenetrable, and deeply infuriating. Thank you, I suppose." I shifted my weight, feeling the soft wood beneath my bare feet. "You called me lords last night, right before I passed out. How do you know my name?" Eamon pushed off the doorframe and walked toward a massive oak dining table, setting down a steaming plate of venison and eggs. "Eat," he commanded, ignoring my question. "I'm not hungry until I get some answers." I lied. My stomach twisted violently at the smell of the food, practically screaming in starvation. He paused, resting his hands on the back of a chair. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. When he finally looked at me, the intensity in his gaze made me want to take a step back. There isn't a wolf in 1,000 miles who hasn't heard of the Silver Pine Massacre, Lourdes Carranza. Nor is there one who hasn't heard of the bounty placed on the sole survivor. My blood ran cold. The warmth of the fire vanished instantly. "Gideon," I breathed, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "Gideon Ashvale," Eamon corrected, his tone darkening slightly. "A pathetic excuse for an alpha. A tyrant who relies on fear because he lacks the strength to command respect." I stared at him, my mind racing. Most wolves spoke of Gideon with trembling reverence or absolute terror. Gideon was expanding his territory, crushing smaller packs, absorbing the weak. No one insulted him so casually. No one except. My eyes widened as the realization crashed into me with the force of a falling pine. The immense size. The amber eyes. The remote, fortress-like cabin in the absolute center of the Blackmere territory. The suffocating aura of command that demanded submission without a single word. You. I took a staggering step backward, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. You're the Alpha King, Eamon Blackmere. He didn't smile. He didn't confirm or deny. He simply pulled out the chair. Sit down and eat, lords. You are too thin, and your scent is thick with exhaustion. I was trapped. I had run from a brutal warlord directly into the den of the most feared, unpredictable alpha in the continent. Eamon Blackmere was a ghost story. A king who had abandoned his court 5 years ago, choosing self-imposed exile in the mountains. Rumors said he had gone mad. Rumors said his beast was too volatile, too violent to be around others. Are you going to turn me over to him? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. The bounty must be substantial. Eamon's eyes flashed. A sudden, dangerous gold. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides. I shrank back, hitting the edge of the stone fireplace. He braced one massive hand on the stone beside my head, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. The scent of pine, winter air, and pure, concentrated power enveloped me. Do I look like a man who needs Gideon Ashvale's coin? He growled, his voice a lethal whisper. Or his favor? Then what are you going to do with me? I whispered back, unable to break his gaze. He studied my face, his eyes dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. The unpredictability in him was terrifying. One moment he was a detached savior. The next, a predator evaluating a claim. For now, Eamon said softly, I am going to watch you eat breakfast. What happens after that depends entirely on whether or not you continue to test my patience. He pulled away, the sudden absence of his heat leaving me shivering. He walked back to the kitchen, leaving me alone with the terrifying realization that my survival was now resting entirely on the whims of a volatile king. The cabin was a gilded cage, and Eamon was its silent warden. For 2 days, the aftermath of the blizzard kept the mountain roads impassable. I spent the hours wrapped in blankets, reading books from his vast library, and watching him out of the corner of my eye. He was a creature of intense, calculated habit. He chopped wood with terrifying, rhythmic force. He read in silence. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried the weight of law. Despite his fearsome reputation, I caught moments of startling gentleness. I watched him bandage the paw of a wounded fox that had sought shelter on the porch, his massive, calloused hands moving with surprising delicacy. It was a stark contrast to the monster Gideon was. Gideon. The thought of him sent a phantom ache through my ribs, right where he had broken 3 of them during my escape. Gideon was charming, meticulously dressed, and completely devoid of a soul. He could smile at you while plunging a knife into your back. He had wanted me because of my bloodline, because of the rare tracking abilities my half-blood nature afforded me. When I refused to become his weapon, he slaughtered my pack to make an example of me. You're projecting your fear. Eamon's voice shattered the quiet of the library. I jumped, dropping the leather-bound book I was holding. He was standing in the doorway, an axe resting casually over his broad shoulder. I'm not afraid. I lied reflexively. Eamon set the axe down and walked over to me. He knelt before the armchair I was curled in, putting himself at eye level with me. It was an incredibly intimate, disarming gesture from a man so dominant. Your scent betrays you, lords. It sours with panic every time you look out that window, he said quietly. He is not here. He will be, I whispered, staring down at my hands. He doesn't stop. He's a hunter, Eamon. He views me as property. Once the snow clears, his trackers will find the scent trail I left before the storm. Eamon reached out, his large fingers gently catching my chin, forcing me to look at him. His touch sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. The warmth of his skin was an anchor in the rising tide of my panic. Let him come, Eamon said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a dark ancient promise. This is my mountain, my territory. The trees here do not bow to Gideon Ashvale, and neither do I. Before I could process the gravity of his words, a sharp, piercing howl tore through the crisp winter air outside. It wasn't the howl of a wild timber wolf. It was a warning. A sentry. Eamon's demeanor shifted instantly. The gentle protector vanished, replaced by the Alpha King. He stood up, his amber eyes glowing with sudden violent intensity. "Stay here," he commanded, turning toward the heavy front door. I scrambled to my feet, the oversized flannel swirling around my legs. "Eamon, wait. If it's Gideon, it is not Ashvale," Eamon said, grabbing a heavy wool coat from the rack. "It is someone far more complicated." He opened the door, stepping out into the freezing air. I couldn't obey him. I crept to the window, peering out through the frost. A figure was emerging from the tree line. A woman. She moved with an elegant, deadly grace, her boots crunching lightly on the packed snow. She wore a sleek, white winter coat that practically camouflaged her against the landscape. As she drew closer, I saw her face. Sharp cheekbones, piercing icy blue eyes, and dark hair pulled back into a severe braid. She stopped at the bottom of the cabin steps, looking up at Eamon. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language was tense. Eamon stood like an immovable wall, while the woman gestured sharply, her face a mask of furious urgency. Suddenly, her head snapped toward the cabin. Her icy eyes locked perfectly onto the window where I was hiding. A chilling, slow smile spread across her lips. I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. Eamon came back inside a moment later, kicking the door shut with more force than necessary. He looked furious, a muscle feathering in his clenched jaw. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice tight. "Xiomara Barrera," Eamon growled, shrugging off his coat. "My former emissary, and a woman who rarely brings anything other than disaster. What does she want?" Eamon turned to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "She wants you, lords. Gideon Ashvale has officially petitioned the High Council. He claims you are a thief who stole valuable pack artifacts, and he is demanding your extradition. Xiomara has come to collect." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. You aren't going to give me to her, are you?" Eamon stared at me, the silence stretching into an eternity. For the first time since I arrived, I couldn't read him. The unpredictability of the Alpha King flared to life, and I realized with horrifying clarity that I didn't know this man at all. He was a king. Kings made political sacrifices every day. "Pack your things, lordes," he finally said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. My breath caught in my throat. The betrayal was a physical agony, sharper than the cold, deeper than the fear. I had trusted the monster in the woods, only to be handed back to the devil. "I have nothing to pack." I spat, my voice laced with venom and unshed tears. "You know that. I arrived with nothing but the clothes you peeled off me." Eamon stood perfectly still, his broad back to me as he stared into the fireplace. He didn't rise to my anger. He didn't defend himself. His silence was infinitely more maddening than an argument. "Eamon, please." I hated the desperation bleeding into my voice, but I had no pride left to salvage. "Gideon will torture me. He'll keep me chained until I track every rogue and enemy he has, and then he'll kill me just for the pleasure of it. You can't let her take me. Xiomara is not a foot soldier, lordes." Eamon finally spoke, his voice heavy, like grinding stones. "She is a representative of the High Council. If I refuse her outright, I declare war on the council itself. I bring an army to my doorstep. So, I am just math to you," I said bitterly, stepping closer to him. "A calculus of risk. One half-blood life against your peace and quiet." He whipped around, his speed terrifying. In a fraction of a second, he crossed the room, his massive hands gripping my upper arms. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to paralyze me. His amber eyes were blazing, a maelstrom of suppressed rage, and something else, something raw and agonizing. "Do not speak of things you do not understand," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "You think I hide in these mountains for peace and quiet? You think I am a coward? I think you're handing me over to a butcher," I yelled back, refusing to back down from the fire in his gaze. For a long moment we stood there, chests heaving, the air between us crackling with a strange, dark electricity. The proximity was overwhelming. I could see the golden flecks in his eyes, feel the erratic, heavy thump of his heart against my own chest. Slowly, the anger drained from his face, leaving behind a profound weariness. He released my arms, stepping back and running a hand through his dark hair. 5 years ago, Eamon began, his voice a quiet rasp. My mate was murdered. The words struck me like a physical blow. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a sudden, aching shock. Alpha Kings rarely took mates. When they did, the bond was legendary. To lose a mate was a madness most wolves didn't survive. She was pregnant. Eamon continued, staring blindly at the wall. It was a political assassination, orchestrated by a coalition of alphas who feared the Blackmere bloodline growing stronger. When I found her body, my beast broke. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through his massive frame. I slaughtered them. All of them. Guilty and innocent alike. I burned 3 territories to the ground before my rage broke. I became the monster they feared. That is why I am here, lords. I exiled myself because I cannot trust the beast inside me. If I fight the council for you, the beast will wake, and if it wakes, I will drown this continent in blood. I stared at him, my heart breaking for the broken king. The terrifying Alpha was nothing but a grieving man terrified of his own shadow. Before I could respond, the front door swung open. A blast of freezing air swept into the cabin, bringing Xiomara with it. Touching story, Eamon, Xiomara said, her voice dripping with elegant condescension. She brushed a speck of snow from her immaculate white coat. But ancient history won't save the girl. The council's patience is thin. Gideon is already moving his men to the base of the mountain. Give her to me now, and I can smuggle her out before it becomes a bloodbath. Smuggle me out? I narrowed my eyes. You're here to hand me over to Gideon. Xiomara offered a sharp, unpredictable smile. Oh, sweet girl. Gideon is a brute. The council finds him distasteful, but useful. However, if he obtains your tracking bloodline, he becomes too powerful. My orders aren't to give you to Gideon. My orders are to execute you quietly, ensuring neither Eamon nor Gideon can use you. The room plunged into an absolute deadly silence. Xiomara wasn't an emissary of peace. She was an assassin. Eamon didn't shout. He didn't shift. He simply stepped between me and Xiomara. His posture didn't change, but the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, thick with the terrifying, suffocating pressure of an alpha's pure dominance. You will leave my cabin, Xiomara, Eamon said quietly. Xiomara's smirk faltered under the weight of his aura. Be reasonable, Eamon. She's one girl. If you protect her, Gideon will use it as an excuse to march on your territory. You'll have a war you swore you'd never fight. Tell the council. Eamon's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that shook the glass in the window panes. That the Alpha King's exile is over, and if they or Ashvale take one step into the Blackmere woods, I will finish the slaughter I started 5 years ago. Xiomara stared at him, genuine fear flickering in her icy eyes for the first time. She knew he wasn't bluffing. She gave a stiff, jerky nod, backing out the door without another word. Eamon turned back to me. The broken man was gone. In his place was the king, terrible and magnificent. Get dressed, lords, he ordered, his eyes burning gold. They are coming. The wait was worse than the chase. Eamon had outfitted me in dark, heavy hunting clothes from his own stores. I felt like a child playing dress-up in armor, standing beside a god of war. Eamon had spent the last hour systematically preparing the cabin. He didn't barricade the doors. He opened them. He stood on the massive front porch, a solitary figure against the encroaching twilight, waiting. I stood in the doorway behind him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. You shouldn't have done this, I whispered to his broad back. You've doomed yourself for me. You don't even know me. Eamon turned his head slightly, a dark, enigmatic half-smile playing on his lips. I know you are the first thing in 5 years that has made me want to wake up in the morning, lords. Now, step back into the shadows. Do not speak unless spoken to. Before I could question his cryptic, breath-stealing confession, the forest line erupted. They didn't come as wolves. They came as men. Dozens of them, stepping out of the tree line, their boots crunching ominously in the snow. They were armed, their faces painted with the arrogance of numbers. And at the center of the formation stood Gideon Ashvale. Gideon was terrifyingly handsome. He wore a tailored dark overcoat that looked entirely out of place in the wilderness, his blonde hair perfectly styled. He smiled, and the sight of it made bile rise in my throat. It was the smile of a sociopath who had cornered his favorite toy. Eamon Blackmere, Gideon called out, his voice smooth and carrying effortlessly in the cold air. The myth, The legend. It is an honor to finally meet you. Eamon stood with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, exuding a terrifying stillness. You are trespassing, Ashvale. Gideon chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. A misunderstanding, I assure you. I am simply here to retrieve stolen property. A little stray dog that wandered onto your porch. Hand her over, Your Grace. And my men and I will leave your peaceful solitude unbroken. I have no property of yours, Eamon replied smoothly. Gideon's smile tightened, the mask slipping slightly. Don't play games with me, old man. Her scent is all over this mountain. Lourdes, I know you're in there. Come out, sweetheart. The punishment will be far worse the longer you make me wait. Hearing him speak my name, using that sickening pet name, sent a violent shudder through me. I instinctively took a step backward into the cabin. Eamon shifted his stance, placing himself entirely in Gideon's line of sight to the door. You address me, Ashvale. Not her. She is mine. Gideon snapped, his composure snapping. He took a step forward, his men mirroring the movement. She belongs to the Silver Pine, and I own the Silver Pine. You are a broken, exiled relic, Eamon. You have no pack. You have no army. You have nothing to defend her with but a reputation that is 5 years out of date. Give her to me, or we will take her. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The absolute unpredictability of the situation gripped me. Gideon had the numbers. He was a rising tyrant. Eamon was one man, fighting a beast inside himself as much as the army before him. Eamon slowly unclasped his hands. He rolled his shoulders, a slow, deliberate movement that radiated pure, suppressed violence. You are correct, Gideon, Eamon said, his voice dropping into a register that was more growl than human speech. I have no army. I have no pack here. But you have fundamentally misunderstood one crucial fact. And what is that? Gideon sneered, drawing a long, serrated hunting knife from his coat. Eamon's eyes flared, a brilliant, blinding gold. The air pressure around the cabin suddenly dropped, a heavy, suffocating wave of dominance rolling off Eamon like a physical shockwave. Several of Gideon's men stumbled back, clutching their chests, their inner wolves whining in terror at the presence of a true alpha king. I am not protecting her from you, Eamon snarled, a dark, terrible smile breaking across his face. I am protecting you from me. If you take one more step onto my porch, Gideon, I will tear your throat out with my teeth and make your men wear your blood as war paint. Gideon hesitated. For the first time, I saw genuine, unadulterated fear in his eyes. The charismatic tyrant was suddenly face to face with an apex predator. You're bluffing, Gideon spat, though he didn't take a step forward. You won't risk a war with the council over a half-blood. Eamon took one step down the porch stairs. It was a single, definitive motion. Watch me. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. It was the silence of a held breath before a fatal strike. Gideon stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, his serrated knife suddenly looking like a child's toy against the looming, mythic presence of Eamon Blackmere. Eamon didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. I watched from the doorway, my hands trembling. Eamon's unpredictability had reached its zenith. He was risking a continental war, risking the awakening of the monstrous grief that had driven him into exile. All for me, a girl who had stumbled out of a blizzard 3 nights ago. Gideon's jaw worked furiously. He was calculating the odds. He had the numbers, but a true Alpha King's power wasn't measured in foot soldiers. It was measured in raw, ancestral magic. To fight Eamon here, on his territory, was a suicide mission, and Gideon, above all things, was a survivor. The council will hear of this, Gideon hissed, his voice shaking with impotent rage. He slowly lowered the knife. You are harboring a fugitive. You are a traitor to the high laws. Tell the council whatever helps you sleep at night, little boy. Eamon replied, his voice a lethal, vibrating hum. But if I ever see your face in the Blackmere woods again, or if I catch even a whisper of your name near hers, there will be no negotiation. There will only be a massacre. Now, get off my mountain. Gideon glared at Eamon, a promise of future violence burning in his eyes. He shot one last, venomous look past Eamon, trying to find me in the shadows. This isn't over, lords, Gideon mouthed silently. Then, he turned on his heel. He gestured sharply to his men, and like whipped dogs they retreated into the darkening tree line, swallowed by the shadows of the ancient pines. I stood frozen for a long time, listening until the crunch of their boots completely faded away. My knees suddenly gave out, the adrenaline crashing violently out of my system. I collapsed against the doorframe, gasping for air. Eamon turned slowly. The terrifying, glowing gold of his eyes faded back to a warm, deep amber. The monstrous aura receded, leaving behind the stoic, quiet man I had first met. He walked up the steps and knelt beside me, his large hands gently gripping my shoulders. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice soft, a jarring contrast to the warlord who had just threatened to bathe in blood. "No," I breathed, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. You let him go. I didn't want to slaughter 50 men on my porch," Eamon said simply. "It's notoriously difficult to clean the blood out of the floorboards." A startled, slightly hysterical laugh escaped my lips. I covered my mouth, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes. "You're insane. You just started a war." "I have been at war with myself for 5 years, lords," he said, his thumb reaching up to gently brush a tear from my cheek. The contact sent a shockwave of warmth straight to my heart. Fighting Gideon Ashvale is a vacation by comparison. I looked up into his eyes, seeing the deep, echoing sadness there, but also a new, fiercely burning light. "Why did you do it, Eamon? Truly. You could have handed me to Shiomara. You could have walked away." Eamon shifted closer, his gaze dropping to my lips. The air between us, previously tense with fear, was now thick with an entirely different kind of electricity. It was magnetic. It was undeniable. "Because when you knocked on my door," Eamon whispered, his breath ghosting over my skin, "you didn't just ask to sleep here. You woke me up. I have lived in the dark for so long, little wolf. I forgot what the light looked like until you walked into my firelight." My breath hitched. The Alpha King, the monster of the Black Mirror, was looking at me with a reverence that terrified and thrilled me more than Gideon ever could. "He'll come back," I whispered, though the fear felt distant now, muted by Eamon's presence. "Let him," Eamon murmured, leaning in until his forehead rested against mine. "You are under my protection now. You are mine to guard." He didn't claim me as property. He claimed me as a sacred duty. The unpredictability of my life had led me through hell, only to drop me at the feet of a king who was willing to burn the world down to keep me warm. I closed my eyes, leaning into his strength. Finally, truly safe. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world reborn in silence and ice. But inside the cabin, the cold was a distant memory. Lourdes had run from a nightmare, seeking only a temporary refuge. Completely unaware, she was stepping into the den of a sleeping king. Eamon Blackmere, broken by his past, found his salvation in the very girl who brought war to his doorstep. Their bond, forged in desperation and defiance, proved that sometimes the most unpredictable sanctuary is found in the arms of a monster who chooses to be a protector. Their story is a testament to the chaotic, beautiful clash of fate. If this dramatic tale of survival, unpredictable alliances, and the quiet sparks of romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please like, share, and subscribe to support more cinematic, immersive stories like this one.